Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. Today I would like to tell you a few words about Anno Domini 1666 and I would like to give you my thoughts about how to start playing this game. Now, Anno Domini 1666 is a skirmish game published by Wargamer Games Studio, which transports us to the 17th century city of Vienna. Here, the two opposing fractions from the core game, the French faction led by the famous musketeers, and the Polish fraction coming from Zbaraj in southern Poland come to clash in order to influence the election of the new future emperor. In this game we have several modes of play because we have adventure scenarios, we have battle scenarios, we have also a campaign mode and the archenemy mode. But before we start playing, when we get this game, when we open the box, we should prepare ourselves in order to play the first game. And I would like to briefly explain what, in my opinion, would be a good approach in order to prepare your first game, in order to start your first scenario. Now, the first most obvious thing would be to take a look at the elements and at the components of this game. And those are pretty good elements, pretty gorgeous elements. We get a lot of very nice miniatures, and when looking at them, well, we just want to use them, we just want to start playing. The first thing, in my opinion, that we should do before playing is to take a look at the rules. Now, the rule book for this game comes in two booklets, I'd say, because the first one, which is the rule book, and the second one, which is called the scenario book, are two very important parts of the system. In the rule book, what is important and what you should read at the beginning is the list of the components. And it is maybe a trivia, but it is important to well understand what the elements look like and what is their use during the game. What is also important is to get used to distinguishing the miniatures because you get a lot of them in this game. And what I found extremely useful during my first few plays was looking at the graph which is at the end of this rule book, where each of the characters is being represented. We get to see his picture and also the representation of its corresponding model. I found it very useful in order to find the miniature that I was looking for. Now I am able to distinguish all of them, but at the beginning I had some doubts whether I was holding Porthos, Aramis or someone else. Well, from the gameplay point of view, it has absolutely no importance, because even if you use, for instance, Athos as D'Artagnan, it will not be an issue as long as you stick to the correct card of the character. But I like to use the components in a proper way, and this page really helps you a lot to do so. After browsing through the elements, I would recommend to read the rule book. Now, this is a rule book which describes the elements. It describes also first in a more general way how a turn looks like, what are the different distinctive phases, and then it presents the core mechanics. So it enables us to read in more detail about the different elements of the game. What is very useful in this rule book, and what I recommend you to closely read, is the description of the actions, because it is absolutely crucial to know what types of actions to do, and also what is their impact on gameplay. It is important to read those elements inside the rules, because although you have the description of those actions on the player aid, not all of them are included on the player aid, because for instance on the player aid, at least in the Polish version, there is for instance no information about the Overwatch action, which is a very important, very powerful action. The same concerns some additional actions which are triggered through special abilities. So keep in mind that the rules almost always give you more details than the player aid. During your first read, I'd recommend you to not read all the special abilities which are listed at the game's at the rulebook's end. I have already prepared a video which describes all those capacities, so if you are interested in taking a closer look at all those capacities from the core game, I invite you to take a look also at this video. But before your first game, this is not absolutely compulsory. When you are done with preparing your initial band, it is recommended to take a look at those capacities, but you also have the description of those capacities on your faction player aid. So here you get not only the information about the special capability of your faction, you also receive the complete list of the capacities found on your faction's cards, character cards. So you can read this and not all the huge list presented in the rulebook. The same applies to the final table, showing you the different outcome of the capacities used by the gypsy or by other characters. So this is not also a thing which you will be needing during your first play. If you happen to use such a capacity, then you can just use this table. It's just important to know that it is here. Now I said that the rules are inside two booklets, because the second one will be the scenario book, which is not only composed of scenarios, because the content of this document is some rules and then scenarios. You should read through the initial information about the fractions, about the draft, which is something which is just mentioned in the core rule book, but it is described in detail in the scenario book. Here you get also a lot of information about on how to prepare your game, so how to choose your character if you're playing an adventure scenario or if you're playing a battle scenario, how to equip additionally your characters, how to prepare the scenario, etc. Those rules are not described in detail in the rulebook. The same applies to the different additional terrain features, because although in the main rulebook you get some information about the core types of terrain found on the boards, you do not have additional information about the overlays, which can be, for instance, elements of the market or tables which are then placed on the table and on the board. So the description of those elements is found in this scenario book. Then we get the scenarios. As I said earlier, we get the adventure scenarios, then the battle scenarios, and then the campaign mode. The archenemy is found on a different card, but it is also described in the scenario book. Now, for your first scenario, I would recommend an adventure scenario. For instance, the one which is called Przekupka in Polish would be an interesting start. This is the one where you are using only somewhere of about 1/3 of the board of the night depiction of Vienna. It is an interesting scenario to begin with, because it is a scenario in which you get a non-player character who is holding an item, a letter, and both factions will try to persuade this non-character's person to non-player character to give this letter to the players. So this is an interesting scenario because it also has the conversation phase in it. Some earlier scenarios have only the action phase and the battle phase, and they omit the conversation phase because there are no non-player characters on the board, or there are or the players can choose heroes without the talking capacity. Here you'll have to use this capacity in order to persuade this character in order to give you the letter. So this is an interesting scenario. After choosing your scenario, you should carefully read through the information presented in the description. Those information will describe how to create your band, so how many characters you can include in your band, both heroes and also commoners. Then you'll get information about on how to prepare your board, so what board to use, which part of the board will be used, how to place your characters, what overlays to place on the board. Then you get also the information about the victory conditions and the special rules governing, for instance, the scenario's end or some additional modifiers. And you get also the information about the number of alarm tokens used. Now, what those elements mean? First of all, how to create your band. Creating your band will depend on the type of scenario chosen, because bands will be created in a different way in adventure scenarios and in a little bit different way during battle scenarios. Let's start by the adventure scenarios. In adventure scenarios, you will have always an information in the scenario about how many heroes and how many commoners you can include in your band. Now, what is the difference between those two types of characters? Let's take a look at a hero card. A hero is a character who has an asterisk and who also has a gold coin on the upper left corner. This gold coin is important when you are creating a band in the battle scenarios, but in the adventures scenarios, you just have to know which of the characters is a hero and who is a commoner. So while searching for the heroes, you will always be looking at this colored coin. If it is a gold coin, this is a hero. If this is a silver coin, this is a commoner. Now, how such a card looks like? First of all, you get the faction symbol, you get the name, you get the character, you get the sex, the gender of such a hero, which is important because some abilities will work only against characters of the same or of the opposite sex. You get also an information about your health level with two different numbers. The one at the bottom will be your general health. This is the amount of damage that you can sustain. If you reach this level, you are killed. The number which is at the top is the serious wounds level. As soon as such a character is wounded and accumulates this number of wounds, it is seriously wounded and it will receive negative modifiers during all the tests that you do during your turn. Then you get also three different parameters: your strength, your agility, and your fortitude. Your fortitude will be used during some tests, as well as your strength. The most important parameter at the game start, when you learn the game, will be your agility, because the agility will influence your ability to move faster. Normally, during gameplay, a character can move only in straight lines, so it can move. It cannot move diagonally. It has to move orthogonally. If you have an agility number greater than 0, this indicates how many diagonal moves you can make during your movement. So for instance, with an agility of 1, I would be able to make 1 diagonal move. Porthos with an agility of 0 cannot move diagonally at all. Then we get also information about the number of fencing tokens, which are important because if you have fencing tokens, you can try to parry enemy attacks and you can try to fight during a rematch. You get also information about the types of weapons that you're specialized in. If you have a symbol of a weapon, then using this weapon will grant you a benefit. If you use a weapon which has a symbol which is absent on your card, you will get a negative modifier for doing so. Finally, you get also information about your skills concerning ranged weapons. If you get this symbol, this means that you won't be getting a negative modifier while using such a weapon, even if your ability is a 0. If you lacked such a symbol, using, for instance, a pistol would mean receiving a negative modifier. At the bottom of the card, you get the special abilities. As I said earlier, I explained all of them present in the core game in a different video. And finally, also your initial equipment. One information that I didn't mention is this parameter. Those are the connections. This is the connections parameter, which is used during battle scenarios, because during battle scenarios you will pretty much construct your band in a similar way with two major differences. The first one is that you will get a certain amount of gold, or you will receive a certain amount of points if you prefer this way, with which you'll have to assemble your band. So paying for characters, recruiting them, will require you to spend those points from your pool. But if such a character has a certain number of connections, you additionally have to possess a certain number of connection points. Those connection points can be granted by other characters which can be recruited in your band. So for instance, if you want to recruit a commoner having a connection level of 1, you have to already possess in your band someone who gives you a connection of at least 1. So for instance, recruiting this commoner would enable me to recruit this commoner later. I said that you receive also starting equipment, and those equipment will be most often weapons which can be ranged weapons or which can be close combat weapons. They all have a symbol, a certain strength. When it comes to ranged weapons, you get also an information about your minimum test requirements, so the difficulty level of passing a test when shooting. Then you also have a list of 4 different suits which are present on the cards used during gameplay. Those suits, as you can see, represent the head, the heart, they represent also the legs and the bottom part of your body, and when attacking a character you can inflict a certain amount of damage if scoring a hit. The same applies to close combat weapons. They also can hit a certain part of the opponent's body, inflicting a certain number of damage. Now those equipment are basic weapons which are attributed at the game's start. But after finishing the construction of your band, you can also add additional equipment from the special deck, paying for those additional objects by spending money from your pool. In the battle mode, this will be the same pool as the one from which you spend the money in order to construct your band. In the adventure game, you will get a certain number of gold, which are called kreuzers in Anno Domini 1666, and those kreuzers will be used to buy this equipment. The number of kreuzers will depend on your treasury. Each faction has an information about the starting treasury. You can also increase the number of kreuzers using some special abilities of some characters you have. For instance, Porthos is a wealthy character. It gives you one additional kreutzer to spend. So constructing your band in the adventures mode is, as I said, pretty simple, because you choose the heroes, draft the commoners during a draft, then choose additional commoners in order to construct your band. Then you give starting equipment, you give additional equipment, and finally you put additional markers on characters. Each character having a fencing level greater than 0 obtains a fencing marker. Some characters obtain a generic marker. For instance, Aramis is such a case because he has a capacity which allows him to use a generic marker. Additionally, if you happen to have in your band 2 commoners of the same name, because this is legal, it is possible. For instance, you can have two king's musketeers in your band. It is a good idea to indicate each of them with a generic marker, and additionally put the same colored marker beside the miniature on the board. Thanks to it, you won't be making mistakes when attributing damage or when, for instance, using some special abilities or some special effects. The same applies also to activating characters, because thanks to those counters you will not be confused, your opponent won't be confused, and you can clearly indicate which character is represented by which card. After creating your bands, you should prepare the game board. Now this is pretty simple, because each scenario indicates how to construct the battlefield, what board to use, which side of the board to use, what elements, what overlays additionally place and where. It indicates also who places their miniatures where, who starts the scenario. If it isn't described, then the initiative phase will tell you how to determine it. You can place also doors on the standees, on the places where those doors are indicated on the map. If the rules do not say otherwise, doors start the game closed but not locked, and you can therefore open them during standard activations. Sometimes the scenarios, as it is for instance in the Przekupka scenario, will require you to place a non-player character on the board. For instance, here you get a non-player character possessing the letter, which I already explained before. So sometimes you'll place additional elements, additional non-player characters. It's all well described in the scenarios. You should also prepare a certain amount of alarm tokens. Those alarm tokens will be used in order to track time. Normally, a game will end when the last alarm marker is discarded. Those markers are discarded at the rate of 1 per turn at each game's turn, but additionally 1 marker will be removed, firstly when a character is killed, and secondly when you use a ranged weapon. This is a situation in which you attract the attention of the local forces who try to keep order in Vienna, and using a firearm will almost always attract their attention. So this shortens the game, and this accelerates the intervention of the guards present in Vienna. After preparing those elements, you are ready to play the game. What is useful during gameplay, as I said a few moments ago, is also the player aid, because the player aid describes how the turn is played with the different phases. I'd recommend you to keep this player aid beside you during your first plays. It helps to keep track of the different phases, maybe then browsing through the rules and being sure that you haven't omitted anything. Those phases are well described in the rulebook, but the core of the mechanics is here in the action phase. Those actions are described at the right, but beware, as I said earlier, not all of them are included on this player aid. For instance, the Overwatch is absent, and additionally, some characters can have additional capabilities which are not also described here. This player aid is useful because it describes also how a standard test looks like, how an opposed test looks like, what is the sequence of the close combat, what is the sequence of shooting. So very useful player aid. I'd recommend you to use it during your first plays. What is also useful is your faction card, because here you get your special ability of your faction, which you should take into consideration while playing. When playing the adventure scenarios, you do not have to construct your band strictly conformly to those graphic examples. You have to respect the rules indicated at the top of the card. The most important part here is this special rule, because it will feed you with additional cards during gameplay, and it is a very important thing. Those cards are in 2 decks. Each player receives their own deck, which is composed of cards from 4 different suits. You have the skulls, you have the cups, you have the hearts, and you have the horse hose. They are from 2 to 8 with 2 jokers. The red one is the most powerful card. It almost always will enable you to pass a test or to win a combat, whereas the black one is the weakest one. It will most often mean losing a fight or fail a test. Those decks, as I said a few moments ago, are used only by a single player, so each player has their own corresponding deck. Before starting the game, you should also prepare the 2 over decks, the magic deck and the event deck, which are sometimes used to randomly determine some events. You should also prepare the markers, the wound markers, the reload markers, the Overwatch markers. All of those will be useful during certain moments of the game. After preparing all those elements, you are ready to play. So just begin playing. Start with the player who has the initiative. If this initiative is determined randomly, then you can start by the initiative phase, which will require you to make your first opposed test, which is a nice moment to learn how such a test works. And this is pretty it when it comes to playing your first game of Anno Domini 1666. If I had any final recommendation, it would be don't be afraid to play. Just start playing, browse through the rules, don't be afraid to test how different mechanics work. Even if you don't win a game, it is absolutely not the goal of your first 1 or 2 plays. Your main objective will be to discover the mechanics, will be to discover the synergies between different characters, and we'll be learning how to use your strong points, we'll be learning your weaker points, so you know how to defend, how to maybe use additional equipment in order to strengthen your team, etc. This is all part of the game, so just have fun. And if you have any doubts, you can always consult Board Game Geek, or you can also take a look at the frequently asked questions, or you can contact directly Wargamer Games Studio. If you have also If you have also any questions, you can write them in the comment section. We will take a look at them and we will bring you any answers. So my final recommendation is just keep playing and have fun, because this is a fantastic game, but you should invest time in order to learn it. This was a short explanation on how to start playing Anno Domini 1666 from Wargamer Games Studio. Thank you a lot for watching this video. I invite you also to take a look at our other movies. We have some other unboxings or reviews. Have a fantastic day and see you next time.